Here are 5 of the most disturbing last meals requested by death row prisoners. You're Ray Rector, and you're about to be executed by the state of Arkansas for killing a police officer. You're also mentally disabled because after you murdered the officer, you immediately shot yourself in the head in a suicide attempt. You survived, but the bullet destroyed your frontal lobe, leaving you with the mental capacity of a small child. You don't understand what's happening. You don't understand what execution means. All you know is that the nice prison guards brought you a special dinner, and you're really excited about it. Your last meal request was simple: steak, fried chicken, cherry Kool-Aid, and pecan pie. The guards brought everything on a tray, and you ate enthusiastically. The steak was good. The chicken was crispy. The Kool-Aid was sweet. But when you got to the pecan pie, you did something that still haunts everyone who was there that night. You carefully set it aside and told the guards you were saving it for later. For later. You were saving dessert for after your execution. You genuinely believed you'd be coming back to your cell to finish your pie. Your brain damage was so severe that you couldn't comprehend the permanence of death. The guards looked at each other, not sure what to say. How do you explain to someone with a child's mind that there is no later? That in a few hours, they'll be dead, and the pie will sit uneaten in a cell that will never be theirs again? They led you to the execution chamber. You were cooperative and cheerful, probably thinking this was just another prison procedure. When they tried to insert the IV for the lethal injection, they couldn't find a vein because you were so obese. You helpfully suggested they try your other arm, trying to assist in your own execution like you were helping with a blood test. You still thought you'd get to finish that pie. After you were pronounced dead, a guard returned to your cell. The pecan pie was still sitting exactly where you left it, waiting for you to come back. It sat there for hours before someone finally threw it away. The Ray Rector execution became one of the most controversial in American history, raising serious questions about executing the mentally disabled. Arkansas eventually changed its laws. But that pecan pie, carefully saved for a future that would never come, became a symbol of the ethical nightmare at the intersection of mental disability and capital punishment. Let's move to Texas, where one man's greed ended a century-old tradition. You're Russell Brewer, a white supremacist who participated in one of the most horrific hate crimes in American history, the murder of James Byrd Jr., who was chained to a truck and dragged to death in 1998. Now it's 2011, and you're about to be executed. But first, you get to order your last meal. And you're going to go absolutely wild with it because why not? You're dying anyway. Your order read like a challenge to the prison kitchen staff. 2 chicken fried steaks with gravy and sliced onions, a triple meat bacon cheeseburger, a cheese omelet with ground beef, tomatoes, onions, bell peppers, and jalapenos, a bowl of fried okra with ketchup, 1 pound of barbecue with half a loaf of white bread, 3 fajitas, a meat lover's pizza, 1 pint of Bluebell ice cream, a slab of peanut butter fudge with crushed peanuts, and 3 root beers. It was enough food to feed a small family for a week. The prison staff spent hours preparing this ridiculous feast. Multiple cooks working overtime to fulfill the last request of a man who has shown zero mercy to his victim. They brought it all to your cell on multiple trays. The smell filled the corridor. Other inmates could hear the plates clanking. And then you looked at all of it, shrugged, and said you weren't hungry. You didn't eat a single bite. Not the steak, not the burger, not even the ice cream. You just wanted to see if they'd actually make it all. You wanted one final act of control, one last middle finger to the system before it killed you. The guards were furious. The cooks were furious. The prison administration was furious. But the real consequences went far beyond one wasted meal. Texas State Senator John Whitmire was so outraged that he immediately pushed to end the last meal tradition entirely. He argued that giving special treatment to murderers was offensive to victims' families, and Brewer's stunt proved that inmates didn't deserve the privilege. The Texas Department of Criminal Justice agreed. After Russell Brewer's execution, Texas stopped offering special last meal requests. From that point forward, condemned inmates would eat whatever the regular prison meal was that day. No requests, no special treatment. You single-handedly ended a tradition that dated back over a century. Hundreds of future death row inmates would eat boring institutional food for their final meal because you wanted to prove a point. Even in death, you managed to make things worse for everyone. Congratulations, you ruined the last tiny shred of humanity in the execution process for an entire state. Now let's talk about a man whose final request was weirdly specific and incredibly sad. You're Thomas J. Grasso, and you've been convicted of 2 murders. You strangled an 7-year-old woman on Christmas Eve, then strangled an 1-year-old man with his own socks. You're about to be executed in Oklahoma, and you have one simple request for your last meal. Not steak, not lobster, not some elaborate feast. You want SpaghettiOs. Just a can of SpaghettiOs with meatballs, like the kind kids eat. This request tells us something deeply sad about your psychology. SpaghettiOs are comfort food, childhood food, the kind of thing a mother might make for a sick kid. You're about to die, and your brain is reaching for the most innocent, comforting thing it can remember. Maybe it reminds you of a time before you became a murderer. Maybe it's the last connection to a version of yourself that wasn't a monster. The prison tries to fulfill your request, but here's where it gets darkly absurd. They give you spaghetti with meatballs. Real spaghetti, the kind with long noodles, not the little O-shaped pasta in bright orange sauce. It's probably objectively better food than SpaghettiOs. Any reasonable person would say, close enough. But you're not reasonable, and you're furious. You eat the meal, but you're not satisfied. You're angry. In your final statement before execution, you don't talk about your victims. You don't apologize to the families. You don't reflect on your crimes or your life. Instead, you complain about the meal. Your exact words, "I did not get my SpaghettiOs, I got spaghetti. I want the press to know this." Those are among your final words. I did not get my SpaghettiOs. You murdered 2 elderly people, and your last public statement is complaining about pasta shapes. The absurdity is almost incomprehensible. You're about to be strapped to a table and injected with chemicals that will stop your heart, and you're mad about not getting the right brand of canned pasta. The statement became infamous. It's been quoted in articles about death row psychology, about the banality of evil, about how the human brain processes its own mortality. You face death not with dignity or remorse, but with the petulant anger of a child who didn't get the right meal. The families of your victims had to hear you complain about SpaghettiOs instead of hearing an apology. Even in your final moments, you were still only thinking about yourself. Let's travel back to 1925 Germany for one of history's most disturbing serial killers. You're Fritz Haarmann, known as the Butcher of Hanover and the Vampire of Hanover, and you've been convicted of murdering at least 24 young men and boys, though the real number is probably much higher. Your method was distinctive and horrifying. You'd pick up homeless young men from the train station, take them to your apartment, and bite through their throats while sexually assaulting them. You'd drink their blood and eat their flesh. Then you'd butcher the bodies and sell the meat as pork on the black market during Germany's post-WWI food shortage. That's right, you ran a side business selling human meat to your neighbors. People bought what they thought was black market pork and fed it to their families. When police finally raided your apartment, they found bones everywhere. Skulls in the bedroom, limbs under the floorboards. Your walls were literally held together with human remains mixed into the plaster. The neighbors had been complaining about the smell for years, but everyone assumed it was just bad plumbing. Now it's the morning of your execution, the 15th of April, 1925, and you've requested one final meal, a cigar and a cup of Brazilian coffee. Not even a meal, really, just stimulants. You're facing death by guillotine. Your head is about to be separated from your body, and you want to be fully awake and alert for it. Most people would want to be as sedated as possible. Not you. You want to savor it. The guards bring you the cigar and coffee. You sit in your cell, smoking leisurely, sipping the coffee, perfectly calm. You've shown no remorse throughout your trial. When asked about the murders, you casually explained your process like you were describing a recipe. You complained that the prosecution was inflating your victim count and insisted you only killed around 24 people, as if that's reasonable. You blamed your accomplice for the worst parts, claiming you were the merciful one. You finish your cigar, drain your coffee cup, and calmly walk to the guillotine. Your last words are to the executioner, "Make it quick." The blade falls and your head lands in the basket. The Vampire of Hanover is finally dead. though stories persist that people kept finding bones in that neighborhood for decades afterward. The truly disturbing part isn't just the murders, it's how normal you appeared. You had friends, you had relationships, you ran a successful black market business, your neighbors liked you, you were polite and charming right up until you weren't. The cigar and coffee weren't the choice of a monster who knew he was a monster. They were the choice of a man who genuinely didn't understand why everyone was making such a fuss. Just another morning, another cigarette, nothing special. Finally, let's discuss the most mysterious last meal in American history. You're Victor Feguer, and you're about to become the last federal prisoner executed in Iowa before a 38-year moratorium on the death penalty. You kidnapped and murdered a doctor in 1960, shooting him in the head and dumping his body in Illinois. You're 28 years old, and you've requested the strangest last meal in recorded history. A single olive with the pit still in it. Not a jar of olives, not a meal that includes olives. Just one olive. One small green olive with the pit inside. The prison staff is confused. Is this some kind of statement? Are you on a hunger strike? Do you have a medical condition? They ask if you're sure. Yes, you're sure. One olive, please. They bring you the olive on a plate. It looks absurd, this tiny piece of fruit sitting alone on a prison cafeteria plate, your final meal. You pick it up and eat it slowly, carefully avoiding the pit. Then you swallow the pit. This detail is important. You deliberately swallow the pit whole instead of spitting it out. No one knows why, you never explained. You went to your execution without telling anyone the significance of the olive or the pit. Over the years, people have developed theories. Some say it was religious olives are mentioned in the Bible, and you might have been seeking some kind of spiritual redemption. Others say it was symbolic, the olive tree represents peace, and maybe you were making a statement about wanting peace in death. The most poetic theory comes from a guard who was present at your execution. He suggested that you swallowed the pit hoping it would grow into an olive tree from your grave, as a kind of legacy or rebirth. It's a beautiful thought, though biologically ridiculous. You'd be buried in a sealed coffin, in a prison cemetery, where no tree could possibly grow. But maybe that was the point, one final act of irrational hope from a man who had none. You were hanged on the 15th of March, 1963. When they buried you, you had that olive pit in your stomach. Whether it meant something profound or nothing at all, no one will ever know. You took the secret to your grave, and it's still there, buried with whatever remained of that pit. The single olive became legendary. It's been written about in books, discussed in documentaries, analyzed by psychologists. People are still trying to decode its meaning 60 years later. Maybe that was your final act of control, leaving everyone with a question they could never answer. Or maybe you just really liked olives and wanted to keep everyone guessing forever. Either way, it worked. So there you have it, 5 death row last meals that reveal the bizarre psychology of facing execution. A mentally disabled man saving pie for a future that would never come. A white supremacist who ended Texas's last meal tradition by wasting a feast. A double murderer whose final words were complaining about pasta shapes. A serial killer vampire who wanted to be fully conscious for his beheading. And a mysterious man whose single olive has puzzled people for decades. These meals tell us something darker than what these people ate. They reveal who these people were in their final hours. Some childlike and confused. Some spiteful and controlling. Some petty and self-centered. Some chillingly calm. Some permanently enigmatic. The last meal isn't really about food. It's a final psychological portrait. The last window into a mind that's about to cease existing. And maybe that's the most disturbing part. These people, murderers, monsters, some of the worst criminals in history, their final thoughts weren't about their victims or their crimes. They were about pie, pasta shapes, coffee, and olives. The banality of it all is somehow worse than if they'd made grand statements or dramatic gestures. Evil doesn't always look like a villain. Sometimes it looks like someone complaining about SpaghettiOs. Which one disturbed you the most? The tragic pie? The wasted feast? Let me know in the comments. As always, thank you very much for watching. My name is Dr. Hollowstone, and I am really smart. Until next time, farewell.